Oh, hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Sunday night, the 29th of September 2019. And I guess I'm a little giddy because the Giants won today, even though they played the lowly Washington Redskins. But they actually, Mr. Jones looked pretty good today, I must say. So we're all happy. And the Jets didn't play, which is a win. They're on their bye week. Sorry, Jets fans, I had to say that. Okay, so we've got a lot of going on. We have an historic winter storm going on at the end of September in the Northern Rockies, which is now slowly but surely beginning to wind down. We have Hurricane Lorenzo, which became the second Category 5 hurricane of this season. I have to check a stat. One stat that bugs me is there have been two Category 5 hurricanes in a single year, and that's happened multiple times. But I seem to recall that Hurricane Jose a couple of years ago with Irma and Maria briefly got to a Category 5 status, unless they didn't do it in post-analysis. But that would be the only year where you wound up with three Category 5 hurricanes, if my memory serves me, and it may not be, so just want to bear that out. But Lorenzo is out there in the eastern Atlantic, about as far east as you'll ever see a Category 5 hurricane. That was another record that the storm set. And now it's trying to figure out, as it makes its move northward and eventually northeastward or northeastward, does it impact the Azores directly, or did they get sideswiped? And then the big question is, and this is something that different models are kind of handling in different ways, you're going to have a big storm develop out in the northwest Atlantic. Is it going to get picked up by that, and will it rotate around and eventually just sort of get absorbed by it? Or is it going to stay a separate entity and get kicked along to the northeast, in which case it could be an issue for England, Ireland, Scotland, possibly even France, depending on whether it gets pulled somewhat westward or does it completely separate and get ejected out to the east. Either way, Lorenzo, in conjunction with all the activity that's going to be going on in the North Atlantic, is orchestrating a pattern change for later this week, and that's going to make things a bit volatile weather-wise in the eastern part of the United States, particularly the northern mid-Atlantic and northeast. We'll see autumn conditions that we have now going to summer conditions on Wednesday when temperatures hit 90, only to reverse that on Thursday when we get an onshore flow, temperatures in the 60s, and a pretty good chance that we could get some much-needed rain over some of the area, not everybody. And then some very cool temperatures for the end of the week and into next weekend. So with all that said, let me just really quickly remind everybody, those of you who have my free weather app, the updates are in for the Google version. They've been in for a while, but now last week we got the update through on the iPhone. So it's a brand new updated app. You can get your local forecast for just about anywhere you'd like, and it will default to your location if you allow it. So no matter where you are, it will pull down your local forecast. And again, it's free. I put the link up on the chat here. Otherwise, just go to Google Play or the App Store and type Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Or if you go on Google Play and you type just Joe Chaffee, it will come down. All right, so we got that out of the way. So let's get started with our weather for tonight. And I'm going to start with the snowstorm. Now, I did notice we're going to probably have to wait till tomorrow to get some final numbers. Great Falls, Montana, 14 inches is a new record for them. And also for Spokane, Washington, which only got 2 inches, but that is also a record snowfall for them. And this is I put the current map up here, up in, that wasn't supposed to happen, but you can see how this interactive map works. You can click a point here and pull down all sorts of weather information, which we may do here again in just a second. But you see on the radar views, I've overlaid the radar over some of the current conditions. Now, one of the problems when you look out at weather in this part of the country is you've got mountains. So the radar echoes sort of get lost. They don't appear everywhere where it might be snowing or raining or even thunderstorms if you get into some severe weather in situations out in this part of the country from time to time. But rest assured that you're getting some and have gotten some pretty hefty action. I'll just pull up a couple of points here with regards to observations. Helena was on the edge, but here's Great Falls, Montana, which right now is at 32 with a dew point of 30, a west-southwest wind at 7, 10 miles visibility in light snow. And if we pull up the observations from earlier today, one of the things I usually look at that's most important when it comes to snow intensity is look at the visibilities. If they're 5/8 of a mile or less, that's usually moderate snow. It's been snowing for hours out here. When you go back on the obs, going back to yesterday, visibilities varying at times down to about a half a mile. Here, for example, there are 2 observations of moderate snow that were reported on the 28th yesterday afternoon at 2:58 and 3:58 p.m. And then it goes to light, and then it goes to borderline moderate, and then you got moderate snows that lasted into the overnight, and they're still continuing to see hour after hour of nonstop snow in that particular point with temperatures near 30. So they're at 14 inches right now for the totals. And when we look at the snowfall analysis, and I put the link up on the board as well for you so that you could reference this and use this in future occasions. So far, you've got a couple of patches here in parts of Montana that have gotten at least 2 feet. Now, this is through this morning, 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 12Z. So tomorrow we'll get a very good 3-day view of just how much snow fell out here. And you see Great Falls had 8 as of this morning, but I did see 14. Helena is outside of that zone, so they only got an inch. The bigger cities of Montana didn't get into the snowfall. They were too far to the east, like Billings, for example, in the warmer air. But nonetheless, this was a huge snowstorm for the end of September. You're going to get snowstorms like this sometimes in the depths of the winter. So you get them when they come, and this year they certainly came early. Here's Spokane right now. I just put the hovering near Spokane. There was some 6-inch amounts, so perhaps that 2 inches was from earlier. So we'll get all the numbers finalized tomorrow to see what exactly happened out there. So here's the U.S. satellite loop tonight, and the western storm. You see the rotation there right along the west coast, dropping southward. You're getting all this Pacific moisture lifting northeastward, cold air coming down from Canada. The jet stream pattern is one where we're still seeing this trough that hopefully my finger is going to work right here, but you've got this very deep trough out in the west, and then, of course, you've got the corresponding ridge that is in the eastern states, and this is producing very, very dry conditions across much of the south. I saw Mr. Harden, you were asking about, is it ever going to rain again in Alabama? Well, we're finally going to get a bit of a pattern change later this week, so that hopefully should be some opportunities down the road. But right now, we got to get rid of that ridge, and that still has another couple of days to play out. The deep trough, by the way, is also driving some rather cold air down southward into California and Nevada, so there's all sorts of frosts and advisories and some freeze warnings that are up in some areas. The deep trough is really having quite an impact in terms of what's happening weather-wise down in the west, and not just from the snow. You can see all the warnings that are up here for various warnings for frosts and freezes. You've got the remaining winter storm warnings that are up for parts of Montana. Now, this is beginning to diminish now. You're seeing fewer winter storm warnings up because the storm is winding down. And there also is, by the way, on the other side of this, we've got severe weather possibilities tonight across South Dakota, southeastern North Dakota, and parts of Minnesota in a larger area of marginal risk. And this is, of course, as a result of the deep trough that's out in the west. Also a marginal risk back in West Texas and eastern New Mexico, and a small area of marginal risk covering central Illinois and northeastern Missouri. So this particular storm that's out in the west having some big impact. You've got that going on. You had a Category 5 hurricane last night with Lorenzo lasting for about 6 or 7 hours. And here in the east, it's just been a big snooze fest. Notice nothing from the northern mid-Atlantic up to Maine, and nothing in terms of showers or storms in the southeast, from the southeast coast back across Georgia and Alabama and into the lower Mississippi Valley. A little bit of scattered action forecast down through parts of Florida and also through southern Louisiana and Texas, but really it is rather minimal when it comes to that. Here's a loop of the view of the Northern Rockies itself, and it's a tight view, so you kind of lose everything in terms of where the state lines are during the day side. You go to the night after sunset, and you see where the state lines actually mark up, but still getting a ton of moisture, and you see the rotation that is back in western Montana and Idaho. That's all part of the upper low that is moving right along. And now a west coast view, which is always useful, and there's your deep trough along the west coast coming inland and sweeping all of this eastward. So you've got all this stuff going on, and yet we're trapped here in a ridge position here in the eastern part of the United States, and we're waiting for it to just get out of the way. Now, let's jump over to Lorenzo, which still has some semblance of an eye tonight on the infrared satellite view. It's obviously not the hurricane it was yesterday. And last night in particular. It was kind of a funny day yesterday because it weakened a bit. Then all of a sudden, late yesterday afternoon, it just suddenly started getting better organized again. It strengthened rapidly. So it went from a borderline Category 3 to a Category 5 hurricane in a matter of hours. Sometimes the satellites can be a little bit deceptive in what's actually going on. Not that they don't tell us the real story, but obviously sometimes there are other factors in play. And while conditions may have suddenly become slightly more hostile in terms of holding that peak intensity, whatever was going on relaxed for a long enough period of time to allow this to blow up again. And we saw some degradation today in terms of the satellite pattern. It's been kind of holding its own this evening, but I think we're past the peak intensity now, and we're just going to be trying to figure out where is it going to be going. Still a very large hurricane from north to south. That cirrus canopy goes out about 8 or 9 degrees in latitude. Maybe it's a shade smaller than what it was a day or two ago, but still a very, very large hurricane indeed. Gales going out a couple of 100 miles from the center, and of course those hurricane force winds that are inside that core, which is goes about 50, 60 miles in all directions from the center. By the way, you'll notice elsewhere in the tropics there really isn't much going on other than Lorenzo. It's pretty quiet. Lorenzo being such a dominant force and player in that part of the world is creating some hostile conditions in the upper atmosphere for any waves that are coming off the African coast at the moment. So I wouldn't expect anything to develop there anytime soon. So we seem to be headed into a bit of a quiet period. And I think there'll be one more burst of activity somewhere. More than likely, it's going to be further to the west. As we get deeper into the month of October, the area of development does tend to shift westward. So I think that's where we're going as far as maybe getting another couple of named storms out of this season before it is all said and done. So here's the Hurricane Center's official forecast, and it just it passes west of the Azores Islands by about a good 60 to 90 miles to the west as a hurricane, but this is certainly going to put them in gales on the east side. And then, of course, the big question is, does it get into a situation where it gets pulled northward and rotates around the large upper low that is forecast. I mean, is it going to do something? I'll use red. It's a better color there. We'll use red. So from here, is it going to be doing more something like this? And it's not going to survive as a tropical storm when it does that. It's going to become post-tropical or extratropical. Or is it going to get shot out? You're going to have all this development going on with a big upper low in this position. But there are some models that say no, instead it's just going to get kicked away to the northeast or even get kicked out to the east-northeast later this week. So I think this is something that the folks in Ireland and England and over in France might want to keep an eye on this, and certainly in the Azores, because I think the Hurricane Center is going to have to do something at some point with regards to putting up tropical storm watches or tropical storm warnings, or maybe even a hurricane watch for the Azores. I'm not sure how. Portugal is who has the Azores, so I guess it's going to be up to them as to what they'll do. We'll see what the Hurricane Center does with its subsequent forecasts going forward. But here's the GFS from today, and the strengthening upper low east of Newfoundland. You can see it here. It's pretty obvious, and it picks up Lorenzo, and it gets that little side swipe to the Azores. And this is, oddly enough, it was the GFS that originally was taking it over toward Europe, and some of the other models were rotating it around, and now they've kind of reversed roles here. When you see what happens with the GFS, there's a trough that is extending southward right there, swinging around. That picks up Lorenzo and winds up rotating it around toward the southern tip of Greenland. And, of course, at this point, as I said, this would have been absorbed into that. And you see how it lifts up well west of Ireland and England, just comes rotating around, and then it just merges with that upper low that is sitting south of Greenland. Now, also note, that's a big deal for us in the eastern part of the United States, in the eastern half of the U.S., because it does change the overall pattern. It drives a trough off the New England coast late this week. You see it here, and this is going to be bringing down some fairly chilly air from eastern Canada down into the northeast, and actually it'll probably make it all the way down into the southeastern part of the United States. So this is going to be a really solid shot of cool autumn air. And there will be subsequent shots to follow, because there's another short wave that's coming out from the northern plains. You don't have a big upper ridge that builds once that first trough pulls out. You do have a little bit of ridging, but it's by no means anything to write home about, because the next trough comes through on Monday with another shot of cooler, drier air behind it. Now, after that, does the ridge come back in the east, or do we get another trough that comes into the west? There is ridging in the eastern part of the United States in the longer term, but it's kind of on the flattish side because of the strengthening jet out of Canada and this upper low that heads over into James Bay. But certainly this is a much different type of flow pattern that is setting up in the longer term. And I think it's going to also open opportunities for rainfall. Not anything crazy, but at the very least, we're going to get out of this this dry pattern that we've been dealing with, and that would certainly be a good thing. Now, I'll bring up the surface map on this view before I go to the U.S. side, and we can watch what happens with Lorenzo. By the way, the maps are courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com, Levi Cowan's great website, so that we can look at all these models all in one place, and the graphics are great, and we thank him for letting us use them here on our live streams and on our website. So there's Lorenzo. We are seeing how the GFS takes it well to the west of Ireland and England, and just lifts it up and around, and you've got this big Atlantic Ocean monster, which eventually, by the way, gets kicked eastward. And then there's another big storm down the road, non-tropical. This is the one that moves off the east coast, a low that moves off the east coast on Thursday, That could bring us some rain on Thursday for New York State, for southern and central New England, down to about Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That looks to be the southernmost extent of it. And rain chances later this week open up near the frontal boundary that will be down from South Carolina back through Georgia and southern Alabama. I don't know how much you're going to be able to get out of it, but at least you'll get something. And then the high, of course, behind that low, you get this nice shot of cool air. The air is cold enough actually for some snow if there was some moisture around, or a shortwave trough in parts of northeastern New York and interior New England. That's how cool this air is, but it looks like there's no, the trough axis is a little bit too far to the east for anything to happen up there as far as the cheap thrill early season snowfall is concerned. All right, so let me come back. Hang on one second. I just want to double check on everybody's here. Everybody's on board, which is always a good thing. It's nice to see on a Sunday night. Glad to see a nice crowd. It's just, I guess I should just say it's nice to see that anybody shows up on a Sunday night. So let's take you through the weather for the coming week, as far as what it looks like at ground level. And you know what? I just had a thought. Let me go back to this. Let's look at the European with respect to Lorenzo. The European's on board with what's going to be happening in the eastern part of the United States. But Lorenzo here gets to the Azores. It's actually a little bit further east than the GFS. It gets to the Azores and it misses the trough that's swinging around the strong storm south of Greenland. So it gets ejected separately, and you see it here by Thursday morning. It's just south of the southern shores of Ireland. But the European also then kicks it eastward, because right here, hang on, folks, right there. Whoops. Nope, didn't want to do that. Hang on, get my little pen there. So right here is a front, and that's basically forcing what is Lorenzo, or maybe even at this point it's probably a hybrid at this point, moving more east than moving northeast. So there's a lot of uncertainty here with regards to the longer haul, but the action in the east on the European is the same as the GFS's idea with what's going to happen later on this week. And the upper air on the European also a bit different, because it kind of has a bit more of a flattish look to the system that's out in the Atlantic. You see it tries to pick it up there, but it never really quite gets there. You get more energy kind of focused back more from the upper low back down toward Newfoundland and into New Brunswick. So the European suggests that Lorenzo kind of loses that extra short wave that's going to try to lift it up and around, and instead just kind of gets kicked away to the northeast and then eventually to the east-northeast. But for our purposes, the bottom line is that whichever model you look at, the idea of the weather pattern shifting around and changing a bit in the United States makes complete sense at this stage. Okay, now we'll go to the GFS and look at what the weather's going to be like for this week. All right, that's at Friday. You can see that the GFS model wants to make a little snow up there in northern New Hampshire and up into parts of Maine. So here we go. Let's start off with the fact that you've got this high in eastern Canada that's going to be dropping southward off the Gulf of Maine to Cape Cod. So at least through Monday and Monday night, we're still going to be dealing with a rather cool onshore flow in the northeast down into the northern mid-Atlantic. Tomorrow's temperatures will probably be in the upper 60s to mid-70s. And then we're going to start to bend that wind around to the southwest and west. So Tuesday will warm up a bit. There'll probably be some clouds around. There's some semblance of a bit of a warm front trying to move through. And then Wednesday, with a west or a west-northwest wind, we wait for a cold front. And this is the day that we're going to see some pretty hot temperatures around here. So just going back to Wednesday's highs, notice northeast Virginia low 90s, 92, 93, 94 at Washington, 93 at Baltimore, 92 at Philadelphia, 87 in New York City, and you're looking at 80s up into Connecticut. You get up into Massachusetts and in upstate New York, you're talking about 70s and then cooler 60s because they're going to be on the northern side of this east-west frontal boundary that's going to be moving on through. And as we go a bit further to the south, and my daughter was telling me, because she's down in Georgia, was telling me they were going to 96 today, and the heat's just been unbearable. But you're still seeing 90s through the Carolinas, down through Georgia, into the middle of next week. Still seeing highs in the low to mid 90s across many areas, parts across the south into Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee, and over into Kentucky, and even some 90-degree readings in southern Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. Oftentimes, not always, but sometimes it takes something big to make the change you're waiting for with respect to the seasonal change from summer to autumn. And I think my way of describing the month of September is that we didn't really quite see something like that. We sort of went to this gradual pattern, a gradual change in the pattern where we cooled off. We still had some very warm days, but we also had a lot of cool days. And, here we've got this weather front that's coming through on Wednesday. Now, the problem is you got all this cool air, and the initial push is to the east. We have to get a second wave to develop to really get that cool air to come on through. There might be a couple of showers or thunderstorms with that frontal boundary as it moves southward, but it's going to stall, and it's got to wait for this low. You see this low that's moving across Michigan on Thursday. That is going to eventually just translate itself to the coastline. Let me just get rid of this. It's going to translate itself to the coastline, bring with it maybe a bit more of a widespread rainfall, but it doesn't extend that far to the south. It gets down into Pennsylvania and maybe into central and south Jersey, and it's from there north and east that benefits from this. The areas south of there really don't see very much, and then that low is that's the catalyst for the change in the weather for late this week, the cooler weather that comes in, particularly starting on Thursday. We're going to be on the other side of that frontal boundary, so we'll be in the 60s for my area anyway, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. But Friday, that's when you get the real push. Once that low goes by, you get that real push of cool air going all the way down into the Carolinas. And eventually that frontal boundary, as we get to Sunday, the frontal boundary is somewhere down in here. I have it maybe a little bit too far to the south there. It's probably more like this. Or even a bit further north than that. So I guess from the standpoint of areas in the south that want to see some showers, you're going to have to rely on this, and I'm not really overly enthused by it with respect to rainfall. Meanwhile, there's no pending doom of another snowstorm out in the northwest, just a little bit of light precip next weekend, and then you get the next low that runs up to the Great Lakes. And the model seems to be doing something with this, and that brings another cold front through here next Monday. And with that, another shot of cool air that comes down. So, look, at least from the standpoint of getting these things to happen on a bit more of a regular basis, we're beginning to see that. And also the fact that the upper ridge is not going to necessarily want to build in the east in the same fashion as what we have been seeing. I don't particularly think that what we've been experiencing in the last month or so has been anything overly unusual from the standpoint of the weather, say from the northern mid-Atlantic up through New England. We've had a fair amount of days where the weather actually has been quite reasonable, and September is, once you get past that early part of September, it tends to be a very dry and inactive month. We're kind of waiting for the winter systems to get underway in Canada to start moving things along, and that takes a little bit of time. So I think that's what we've been seeing, and Lorenzo definitely acting now as the catalyst with regards to getting us into some real autumn air that's going to be coming down the pike in not too long from now, by the way. All right, I knew you guys are all starting to talk about the winter, Ethan Bean. Winter 13, 14, and 14, 15, decent analog years. Okay, if you're a fan of analogs, they just happened to be 2 years where the winters were fairly brutal in the Northeast, but we'll just leave that there for now. 16, 17 was a potential year in terms of the Enzo, which wasn't a good year, however, leaning more toward 14 and 15. That's a backloaded winter, by the way, 14, 15. That really didn't, the first part of that winter was fairly quiet. It really got went crazy with cold and snow from mid-January on. So, what might give us a clue on that? One clue to look for is the tropical storm season. If it shuts down early, it might be a sign that we could be seeing, an early start to the winter, or if it still keeps on, we're still seeing named storms well into November. It might be pointing at maybe more of a backloaded winter. We can analog this all day long. At the end of the day, the winter's going to be what the winter's going to be, and I would just much prefer, rather than trying to come up with something that says, okay, it's going to, in general, going to be this way. At the end of the day, you still have to deal with the specifics of the day-to-day pattern and the week-to-week pattern. So that's why I really, one of the big reasons why I don't get into the long range. It just doesn't work for me, okay? It never has. I've tried. I can't get my head around it. Some people can. I had one of my posters on Facebook already was talking about how the QBD, one of the technical features that they look at in the highest levels of the atmosphere was, they've already decided that the winter was going to be, mild with no snow here in the eastern part of the United States. It's like, all right, okay. I sometimes wish that Vegas would take a line on this sort of stuff. I would gladly take the other side of the bets because they were almost always, the forecast. You never hear a forecast, with a lot of the folks, because they're all snow weenies at heart, whether they admit it or not. So they're always going, you never hear a forecaster say that the winter in the East is going to be milder than normal with very little in the way of snowfall for the coastal areas. You never hear forecasts like that. And the reality is, when you look at the stats, well over 60% of the winters wind up being that way. It's the 35 to 40% of the winters where the snows have been substantial that make up for the other years when they're not. The other thing is that the last 20 years, last year was the first below normal winter out of the prior six, for New York City anyway, and areas to the north and east. It was the first below average winter out of the last seven. And when you go back and look at stats, you don't find many streaks of 2 or 3 winters of above normal snowfall. You find a lot of streaks of 3 and 4 and even 5 winters in a row where the snowfall was below average. Temperatures are a bit different. That's a different factor because you only need it to be cold when it snows. And I think the winter of 16, 17 proves that in a big way. The coast got clobbered with snow that winter, in a winter that really wasn't all that cold and was actually warmer than average. We set record highs the day before in February, where we saw temperatures up near 70 in some places. The day before a blizzard that produced a foot to a foot and a half. And then the day that the blizzard, the temperatures were down in the upper teens and low 20s. So that's just the way it is. All right, so I think that wraps it up for a Sunday night. Believe the Weather Channel also talked about the storm being the strongest this far east. Jason Schaefer, you're talking about Lorenzo. Yes, indeed. And Ophelia a couple of years ago was a Category 3 hurricane, but it was also a little bit, at the point that it was a Category 3 hurricane, it was already pretty far to the north of where Lorenzo is at the moment. So at that stage, if you look back at Ophelia, that was the strongest storm they had ever observed. But this is when it was closer to the Azores and then on its way toward Ireland, because Ophelia did reach the shores of Ireland and brought destructive winds there and heavy rains. Hard to see with Lorenzo at the moment because of so many differences in the models as to what is going to play out for Northwest Europe, and particularly for England, Ireland, and Scotland, and perhaps even for France if it gets jetted out to the right. Jared Akers, welcome from Richmond, Virginia. Lovely city. Spent some time there, and thanks for being here. Appreciate it very much. I hope you come here on a regular basis, and it's nice to see. It's nice to see new folks on the chat board. Abaden Durakovic, nice to see you on. I haven't seen you in a while. So Jess Harden, I hope you're happy. I did, at least address Alabama. I don't know about the polar vortex splitting this winter. I have no idea. You guys, you keep asking me long-range questions. I keep telling you, I don't know, okay? It's not my thing. George Senda, our buddy from in Northern California, I believe in Sacramento, 66, 20-mile-an-hour winds, icy cold winds last night. Well, you're going to benefit. You're getting that northerly wind on the backside of the storm in the Rockies, which is bringing down a lot of cool air for you. And David Schwartz, the PNA is more important than an NAO. Absolutely correct. And the EPO, those two. And the EPO, I think, is the East Pacific Oscillation is the most important by my views. And the only thing I would say is, as far as water temperatures are concerned, you just have to be a little careful with those in terms of looking at them, because all it takes is for one big storm and a week of gales, and suddenly you get all this upwelling that turns water temperatures that are running 5 degrees above normal to suddenly running 5 degrees below average. So you just have to watch. You have to watch those a lot. You have to watch them closely, because they can change rather quickly with those numbers. So, and of course, Ethan Bean, you're asking about the winter of 20 and 21. I will just say about the winter, it will be cold at times, it will snow at times, it will rain at times it won't be as cold, and there might even be a time or two where it will be on the warm side. There might even be a time or two where it will be bitterly cold. It will tend to get warmer as we get toward the latter part of February and March and into April. It usually does. Whether it's warmer relative to normal tonight or not, that I couldn't tell you. And I'm not trying to be a wise ass here. I'm just stating that you get wrapped up in all this stuff months and months in advance. Let the pattern just kind of play itself out. We'll get plenty of clues about where this is going to go just by watching the short and medium term. And that's the time frame when you're actually going to experience this stuff. If you're a snow lover, you'll get to enjoy it when it comes down. I understand the frustration behind for snow lovers. I really do. But you gotta not focus too much energy on the long haul, because that really doesn't tell you the story. You could have a winter like 82, 83, where you had it all was about 3 very good weeks in late January and February for snow lovers. But they were a good 3 weeks. Maybe it'll be something this winter it goes back to the winters that we've had back in 13-14 or 14-15. But I would just say that from the standpoint of using 13-14 as an example, which was a winter which started early, ended very late, and was unrelenting in nature during certain stretches of it. Those kind of winters don't happen too often, particularly in the coastal Northeast. So to just kind of go right to that possibility, that's going to be an awfully difficult thing to replicate. I'm psychic. Well, at least you said I was psychic and not psychotic, George Sendit. I appreciate that. Gloria Rangod is on tonight. Nice to see you on board. I know you'd like a winter with very little snow. You've made that point very clear over the last few years on Facebook, and I totally understand it. We'll see what we can do. But certainly Long Island has been one area that has really hit hard with snow over the last, not last year, but the prior 6 winters. 13, 14, and 14, 15 were big snow years for Long Island. And we've had a number of winters in the last 20 years where we've had double the average snowfall or even more. So we're still in an up cycle until the weather data tells us otherwise as far as snow is concerned. We'll see. Fishing with Jack, any predictions on lake effect snow? A little too early. Although with that cool shot coming down, if you're in upstate New York and north central New York doing some salmon fishing right now, you're going to get some cool air and some changes as far as the temperatures are concerned. So I just hope you bought some warm clothing with you, especially for the nighttime hours. Okay, so not that you're supposed to fish in the nighttime hours, because you're really not supposed to fish in the nighttime hours up there. Follow the rules, everybody. Okay, thanks for being here tonight on this Sunday night. You've got Monday Night Football going on, so you may want to get back to that. Again, if you have the free app, make sure you download the updated version for the iPhone and also for the Android version. They're absolutely free. And by the way, I will be switching on the app. I will be switching from the severe weather maps to the snowfall forecast maps. And for those of you who've had the app for a while, I have maps that go from Maine all the way down to Georgia. They're the National Weather Service snowfall forecast maps. So when they update them, they will automatically update on the app, and you get their latest snowfall forecasts, the Weather Service snowfall forecast. Of course, you get mine for my particular area, but I can't, there's no time for me to do the whole eastern seaboard and compensate for mountains and lake effect and the wedge. If you are in the Carolinas and into Georgia, you understand what I mean by the wedge. But the Weather Service will be updating those maps. You can have those handy right there on the free weather app. So be sure to download the updated version today, and it's FREE. I know free is always good. Weather in 5 tomorrow tomorrow morning, so look for that. We'll update you on what's going on, and we'll have our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night probably at about 7 o'clock. I still have a couple of days off ahead of me, so my schedule is going to be a little bit fluid, but figure I'm going to shoot for the usual time, which is 7 o'clock Eastern. Good night, everybody.